evidence a lot of things when you negotiate. I mean, it's certainly confidence, of course,
Yeah.
communication skills, the
Yep.
fact that you understand your value, you understand your role, you understand the business. And so there's so much there that an employer, your company is really going to admire because they're going to say, wow, I'm glad that this person is working for us and not for the competition.
This show is all about helping you up-level your life, including your well-being, your relationships, your mental health, your wealth, your confidence, and your joy. I challenge you to keep an open mind as together we discover tips, tools, and advice from the experts to help you live life to your fullest potential. Welcome to the Jenna Banks Show. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for joining me today. As you know, I'm all about helping you live life to your fullest potential. And one of the ways that we can really achieve as much as we can in life is being a great negotiator. Would you consider yourself a really good negotiator? If not, then I would like to invite you to stay tuned to this show because you are going to learn some valuable negotiating skills that will help you in life, help you live life to your fullest potential, and could literally mean the difference of millions of dollars over your lifespan. Because when we are great negotiators, we negotiate better deals in business, in our careers, we get better jobs, we can negotiate better salaries, we can negotiate better purchases, real estate, cars, whatever it is. Now, and also if you're a good investor, you can take that money that you're saving or that extra money that you're earning and invest it in the compound interest from that alone will save you or make you thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars over your lifetime. So compound, if you think about it in a compound interest kind of a way, every time we negotiate on our behalf, it can cost you so much money over your lifetime or earn you or save you so much more money over your lifetime. But we're not just talking about money here. Being a good negotiator means all the difference in the world when it comes to our self-value, our self-worth, our self-respect, our confidence, our self-esteem, and all that. So we owe it to ourselves to be really great negotiators. And this doesn't mean now becoming that person or a bitch or a mean person. It's none of those things. If anything, it's got to do with self-love and self-value and self-worth. And as a result, people treat us better because we've got more respect. They'll have more respect for you. They'll treat you with more value. They'll treat you more worthy because you feel more worthy. It really is a win-win situation. So I hope you'll do yourself a big favor and stay tuned to this show so you can learn some important negotiating skills. Now, to help shed some light on this topic with me today, I have my lovely, wonderful guest, Caroline Ceniza-Levine. Now, Caroline helps experienced professionals find work they love and earn more doing it. Caroline is the author of Jump Ship, 10 Steps to Starting a New Career. She's also a senior contributor to Forbes Leadership and an adjunct at Columbia University. And a fun fact, she's also a classically trained pianist at Juilliard and Manhattan School of Music. Caroline, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming on the show and having this really important conversation with me today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So to get everyone acquainted with you, I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background and what you're doing today.
Sure. So we're here to talk about negotiation. So just in terms of my own negotiation story, for me, it really started with my career. Before I was an entrepreneur, I spent 15 years in strategy consulting, in human resources, in executive search. In different industries. And so I was negotiating for myself for the jobs that I had and the titles and the raises and all of that. But then when I moved into HR and was working in recruiting, I also negotiated on behalf of my employers, who are hiring people. And so I saw the process from the other side of the desk, people asking for more money, people asking for a promotion or negotiating year-end bonus or whatever. And so I saw that. And then I also teach and I write about career issues. And so I've really looked at negotiation in terms of how do I teach people how to do it? How do I coach people how to do it? What are the trends in negotiating? So I've seen negotiation from so many different angles over the course of my 25 plus year career.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it helps definitely give us some insight into your background into negotiation. And you're absolutely right. A lot of us think of negotiating, we think of like attorneys, for example, but there's so much more to the art and skill of negotiating than that, especially when it comes to our everyday lives. Like you mentioned, career is a big part of, honing in our negotiating skills. And someone like yourself has had to deal with it a lot more than us. So I'm so happy you're here today to have this discussion with us because, I was just talking about someone this weekend or talking with someone this weekend about this exact thing. Like, how do we bring negotiation into our everyday lives? And one example for me that's come up just recently is a move with my partner. And we're moving to our first place together that we're actually purchasing together. And that is a unique situation because when you're in one person's house, obviously it's their stuff, their furniture. And so you don't negotiate as much, although I have been in situations where I've had to negotiate when I felt really strongly about certain things. But in this case, we're moving in together. And so we're negotiating where, we're like the space, for example. The space, there's only so much space, and we each have things that we like to have in our space. Who's going to get what? And so if you're just, a pushover or somebody who allows yourself to be easily controlled, or you don't care enough to fight for what you want, what ends up happening? And I was really thinking through that. Like, what if I didn't negotiate on behalf of where I want to put my desk?
Well,
In
it's
lieu,
interesting.
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You talked about negotiating due to a move, and I thought to myself, oh, are you talking about negotiating with the movers on price? Are you
Yeah.
talking about negotiating with the realtor on the rent or on the purchase of the home? And then you mentioned negotiating the relationship, and it's also about space, but it's also about just how to make decisions and how to make compromises. And so there's so many things that you negotiate, and there's so many people that you negotiate with. So even with the move, it's with each other, but it's also the realtor, the movers, family members, timing, your jobs, because you might have to take some time off work and you have to negotiate with your boss to get that time off.
100, you just nailed it. There were so many times that we both had to negotiate during this entire process. And the one I thought of was the one that one would probably least think of, because I've done this so many times for me, negotiating a real estate situation or work situations and all that. That comes very naturally to me. But you're right. I did take that for granted. There was a ton of negotiating in there. But sometimes we don't think about the little things like, the space in the house, who's going to get what space. And it's not about fighting for yourself and not thinking of the other person, because obviously we want to be compassionate with our partners, but you also can't like take that for granted, I guess. And that is the point of this show, is you have to validate and value yourself as well. You can't let that be swept under the rug out of being nice or the good person or the good girl or the good partner. It's really important to negotiate for yourself because it shows you that you matter and that what you need matters. And at the end of the day, everyone's going to win when you show up as your best self, when you feel like you matter to you, because then that brings respect in the relationship. It brings respect for yourself. And I think it does have a trickle down effect to negotiating for yourself in the workplace. It affects everything. So I think negotiating in general matters on every single level. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you bring up such an interesting point when you talk about space. You gave that example of we're negotiating space, but it's not just space. And that's exactly right. Because on the one hand, it's what are we putting in this space, but it's also how do we make decisions together? And who gets to decide this particular issue? Who's going to decide the next issue? How should we work on this? How do we talk to each other? And so it's so much more than just the space. It's everything that the space represents. And I always remind, my clients or my students, if I'm teaching about negotiation, that this notion of, what do you want to get out of the situation, it's not so clear cut. Sometimes people will say, well, I just want more money, right? Let's just say we're negotiating a job offer and they'll say, I want more money. Well, how does that look? Is that a higher base? Is that bonus potential? Is that equity in the company? Is that a sign-on bonus? Is it paying you out for things that you're walking away from your first job? All of those things are more money, but they're all different things.
You're
And then
absolutely right. I'm so glad you brought that up because so when we get into kind of the finer details of the art of negotiation, I'm glad that you mentioned like those details. So do you find that it's important to go into a negotiation knowing exactly what you want before you even start?
oh, yes,
Mm.
100%, because
Mm.
it colors everything that you do. I want to even take a step, you know, back for a second, because even before you negotiate, I think when people hear the word negotiation, they think of the conversation. They think, okay, Jenna and
Mm.
Caroline are negotiating because they are talking to each other about this topic. That's actually not the start of the negotiation. The negotiation starts before this conversation. If it were you and I, it starts with me preparing myself and you
Yeah.
hopefully preparing yourself. And so that question of what do you want, that's going to color how I do my preparation. Because if I want more money, right, in that, or if I want more space, right? You gave that example about the space. It's thinking about how important is this space to me? This particular space versus other spaces, the living room, the bedroom, the kitchen, whatever. How important is this issue versus other issues? I want to be able to select my furniture, but then I don't really care about where we spend the holidays or, other sorts of partner and significant other types of decisions that you make together. And so you really want to be thinking about all of these issues well before you have a conversation, because if you go into the conversation and you're not 100% sure what you mean by space and how much of a priority that is, how's the other person going to know, and how are you going to clearly and compellingly advocate for what it is that you want?
Such a good point. Oh, I just got chills. That is so strong. And I think that that applies also to not even tangible things. So, for example, negotiating a new footing for a relationship. So, whether it's a family member, a friend, whatever, identifying, I think, what isn't working and how it needs to work for you going forward well before you start the conversation and working that out with yourself and being clear on that is also quite important, no?
Absolutely. And it's so tricky with relationships because so much of it is feeling and emotion and things that are squishy. And you have to give them some tangibility, I would argue, just because you have to be able to explain to the other person, this is where my boundary is, or this is what's making me feel anxious or undervalued
Yeah.
or stressed out or whatever it is. So whether it's giving them an example of a situation or giving them an actual action or activity that they could be doing when you do the dishes after I cook, that decreases my stress, for
Yeah.
example, and that gives them something to go on. And so that what do I want becomes not just, hey, you need to support me more, but it can be something even more specific, like doing the dishes in that
That
example.
is such a good point. Yeah, being specific. And I like those two things right there that you identified. Not just be specific about the thing, but also how it makes you feel. That's super tangible.
Yeah, and it also just helps because here's the thing that I always remind people: when people hear the word negotiation, they think of conflict, of course, because if you just agreed on everything, you wouldn't have anything to negotiate. You're
Right.
there because there is a point of contention. That's why you're having the discussion. But even more important than the disagreement is the agreement. You also wouldn't be having a conversation if you just wanted to walk away from it. If it was someone you didn't care about, you would just agree to disagree and not speak to them again. And
Right.
so the whole reason why you're even negotiating is because you want, in this case, the relationship to work, or because you want to work at that company and they want to hire you, they want you to stay there, etc. And so you do want to tell people how you feel because
Mm,
they want to make you happy. They want this
yeah.
to be a win-win.
Yeah. And also, I think knowing your worth is super important, right? Like when you go into a negotiation, you have to say, this is what I'm worth, and I'm willing to stand up for that. And I think, again, respect comes out of you standing up for your worth. To take the example of knowing what you want before you go into it, when I was in my 20s, I was still new in management. I was so happy to have gotten the job in the first place, but I also took less than what the position should have paid in all actuality. But I was willing to take that pay cut, if you will, for the experience. And it was great for the first year. Got a ton of great experience. It was my first director position. But a year into the position, after doing some research and talking with other industry professionals, I realized I was pretty grossly underpaid, and I had proven myself. There was nothing to prove. I've learned what I needed to learn. I had it on my resume. At that point, I needed to get a serious pay increase. And so my boss at the time was a wonderful negotiator. He was a businessman for 20, 30 years at that point. He definitely had the art of negotiation down. So I had to sharpen my skills. And I did some simulation with another friend of mine at the time who was also a longtime business owner, who believed in me and really helped pump me up, and also said, look, here's the situation. I would pay someone in your same position at my company X amount. And I was just like, wow, man, that's a lot more than I'm getting right now. So it helped. So it helped to go talk to somebody who could kind of reinforce where I was trying to go, and help me form a new belief about what I should be getting paid. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah, well, you touched on actually 3 points. So when I prepare my clients for negotiation, we walk through 7 steps, and you actually touched on 3 of them. When you about know what you're worth, I actually divide that into 2 points. One is your market value, which you're alluding to, asking people what would they pay for
Mm,
this type of position, maybe looking at job ads, talking to recruiters, trying to figure out, if you had to hire for this role, what would you pay? That's the market value, the external data. But then there's also what I call internal data. There's your own experience and your
mm,
background, and you actually might have unique skills or expertise that you should get paid actually more than what the average is being paid. Maybe you need to be paid less, so you want to know where you are in terms of
mm.
that market. Maybe people normally have 5 years going to this and you only have 2 years. And so you need to know that, because your boss, if he's a savvy or she's a savvy negotiator, might know that. And so just knowing kind of where you are on that spectrum, that is also something you want to look at. And many times you actually have more skills or expertise than you think. You might have internships, that add up to years of experience. A lot of students come into they graduate and they actually have some experience. Maybe they have experience at larger companies or going to a smaller company. That's also going to be valuable. Or at a bigger city and coming into a smaller geography, that's valuable. So market data, but your own internal data, those are 2 things that are really important. And then you mentioned the word simulation. Now you were using it in terms of talking to people about, what they would hire for. But I actually think you should run a real life simulation in terms of negotiating with that person, having them role play a
Mm.
negotiation with you so that you can practice out loud what your negotiation is going to sound like, because we can think about it in our heads all we want. It's not
Sure.
going to come out of our mouths the same. And when we hear it for the first time and when we feel the other person, even if it's a friend who's just role playing with you, when they start pushing back and say, I don't know, how did you get that number? Or I don't know that I should pay you that much. You're going to feel nervous. You're going to feel anxious, and you want to push through those feelings and practice pushing through those feelings.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Good point. Oh my God, you're just bringing back a memory when I was in an interview, a second interview, and the CEO was there, and his presence was so intense. I was not prepared for that. It really threw me off. I'm very sensitive to other people's energy, especially when it's very polarizing one way or the other. When it's really positive and happy, it affects me, but also the opposite when it's just like overbearing. And I felt his presence, and it was throwing me off big time. But whoo, boy, I had to really work through that one. That one made me super nervous, but I held my ground, and proved myself that I was worth them hiring, and they hired me. But man, nothing could prepare you for that. But I love that you mentioned that, practicing working through that nervousness, because when you realize you can get through it, I think it's helpful. Like, that situation helped me understand that no matter what challenge I encounter, whether I'm negotiating for a job or some kind of a deal, a business development deal, or whatever it is, that you can work through it, that you can trust yourself and get through it. So that's a really good point about simulation. Okay, so now you've got me super intrigued. You said 7 steps. I didn't realize you had 7 full steps. Would you be able to walk us through that?
Sure. So
Okay.
know what you want is the first step, which we
Okay.
talked about, and how complicated that can be, right? That it's not as simple as I want more money, but it's okay, how does that look? Or I want more space. Which space are we talking about here, and how are we going to make that decision, and what are we going to do with that space, right? So knowing what you want, this is why you want to prepare this in advance, is because you want to untangle this, and you don't want to be untangling it during the conversation you're having with the other person, right?
Yeah, it's going to make
Second
you seem
step,
unsure of
right,
yourself.
exactly.
Yeah.
Unsure. Or you might get convinced by them. They start talking about what they want and what they need. And if you haven't had a chance to think about it, you might just find yourself agreeing, or as a defensive reaction, disagreeing for no good reason, right?
That's a
Both of
very
those are
good point.
problematic.
Okay, so that's number 1. Know what you want. All right, what's number 2?
Yeah. And then we talked about the second one, which is the market data, right? You need to know what your value is. And a part of your value is what the market says, what other roles will play, or in the case of the space and the relationship, right? Just being aware of, how did we solve this problem before? When we've had to make decisions before, what have we done before? When I think about other relationships, how do I manage space there? So just knowing kind of what is customary, what would feel comfortable for you, what you've seen work with other couples, or, in other situations, that's an example of market data, right? Something that's outside yourself. But
Very
then
good
there's
example.
also internal data. So I talked about, it's not just what the market is paying, but it's also, what do you deserve? Because you might have a unique set of skills. And I'll give you an example. I had a client who was going for the top job in a nonprofit, executive director. She had only been a deputy up until that point. And so we knew that the biggest objection the board would have at her salary would be, you're a first-time executive director. Why should we pay you top dollar for being first on the job? And that's a very reasonable objection. And so the nonprofit was in a unique situation of going into a capital campaign. And in fact, that's why they hired her, because her specialty was raising money. And so while she was a first-time executive director, she was a many, many, many time very successful fundraiser, and in the exact moment that they needed what she had. And so our entire strategy was based around really focusing on that issue and raising her internal worth, so that the market value, she was a first time, the market value might point to something, but she deserved more than the market, and she got it because
amazing.
Because again, it's that's what preparation does. And she was ready to do that. So that's step 3.
And but by the way, I love that you just mentioned that, because incrementally, if we negotiate for ourselves higher salaries, a better deal in real estate, whatever it is, these are major points in our life and can make the difference of millions of dollars over our lifetime. No?
Oh, absolutely. Negotiation compounds, because if you think about salary, typically your next salary is based on your previous salary. So if you can get a little bit of bump there, it compounds going forward. Many times our bonuses are based on what the base salary is. So if you can change the base, that changes things. If you can get a raise sooner than once a year, if you can get it even 9 months, that gives you 3 extra months of higher salary. Then, of course, if you're a good saver and investor, then you're making money off of the money that you're keeping. And so it just compounds, even more than just the salary compounding, the bonuses compounding, the time, the savings and investment. So
the bottom line is negotiating is a skill we should all have.
Yes.
And it's not hardwired into us, unfortunately. So if it's not a skill that you have, definitely good to hone in on that skill, practice it, Yes, absolutely. It can benefit our lives in so many ways. So, okay, glad we focused on that. All right, so we got number 3 down. What's number 4?
Yes. So number 4 is really understanding your, I call it counterparty, just the other person on the side of the negotiation. So if we're talking about the space, then it's understanding your significant other. And you might say, okay, well, I'm moving in with this person, or I've been living with this person. I obviously know this person, but you also want to be thinking about, how does this person react to a disagreement? Or,
Mm,
how does this person feel about the space? Do I even know that he cares about the space? Do I know that this is going to be something we even have to negotiate? Or maybe he doesn't care about the space
mm.
and he's just going to be like, sure, and then that's the end of it. And so it's really thinking about, what are we talking about here? Like, what is this person going to want out of it? Because you want to make sure that you're addressing what their concerns are, that you're speaking in a way that they're going to hear you and
Mhm,
understand you. And
mhm,
with a significant other, with your boss, things can get misconstrued. Even if you're living with the person, if you're working with the person day to day, we're all
mhm,
human. So it's really understanding the other person, both temperamentally, but also what their objectives are, what their constraints are. So that's number 4. And then number 5 is brainstorming alternative outcomes. So you want to use the space and you want to
mm.
put this piece of furniture in there. Now, let's just say that he has in mind another configuration for the space. So are you going to, obviously the first outcome for you would be, he just agrees. We're putting the dresser where I
Right.
want to put the, right? Like, that's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is, he puts, whatever piece of furniture he wanted in that particular space. So that's another outcome. But what are other outcomes? You could change the configuration of the space every few months or so.
Mm.
You could try
Yeah.
it one way and then another. You could both compromise and put something completely different in the space that you both want. Your case, the dresser, he wants the bed. They're
Yeah.
just like a number of different things that you can do. And so it's really, but you're doing this before you're having the conversation. So I always tell my clients, before you even get to talking to the other person, you want to brainstorm what might work for both of you, because you want to show them that you're really thinking through all of these different outcomes, and that you're willing to talk about it, and here's why. And it also gives you a chance to make a case for why the dresser in that particular space is indeed
Yeah.
the best outcome.
And you've
You know
thought it
that,
through, right?
right, you
Yeah.
thought it through, you went through all of these options. And so that's number 5, right? And
Okay.
so you can see that you're focused on yourself, the what do you want, the external data, the internal data. You're focused on the other person, what do they
Mm.
want, and then, like, what are the outcomes together. Number 6 is what I call increase your leverage. And you also talked about this just in terms of getting more comfortable with negotiation, and not settling, right? And so the most obvious, or I guess common form of leverage that people will think of, is if you have another job offer, right? So you
Of
can,
course.
of
Yeah.
course, right? So you can say, well, you're offering me 100,000, but I have another offer. It's my second choice company, but they're offering me 120. That's a very obvious piece of leverage there, because
Yes.
then the other person knows that you can walk away
Yeah.
and still have something, and then they also see, oh my goodness, I have to up my game in order to keep this person.
Mm.
So that's one form. But I define leverage really as anything that gives you just the confidence to stay in your position. And so it
Mm.
can also be, I know how to look for a job. So even if I don't have another job offer now, I know that I don't have to settle, because I can find a job. I know I have a supportive network. So if I really need something, I'll be able to lean on that. I have savings in the bank. So I don't have to settle for this. I can keep looking for what the better situation is. So
Mm.
it's just knowing that you can work this out and it'll be okay. So in the
Yeah.
case of, the space and the dresser, an example of leverage might be just looking as a whole on the house and saying, okay, yes, it's this room and this particular space, but we have the rest of the house that we can
Mm.
compromise on. So maybe
Mm.
we can just zoom out 30,000 feet. Or there are half a dozen other key decisions we're going to have to make soon, including buying new furniture, including where to spend the other funds that we have, if we're going on
Right.
vacation, if we're going to go visit the relatives or what. So let me think about, are there other decisions that I know that he wants? And maybe I'm going to really stand in this position here and remind him, hey, we've got all these other things going on. Do you really want to fight me on this dresser thing?
And another thing is also, if the item that you're putting in the space is something you're going to be using on a regular basis, there's that as leverage too, right? Like, how often are you going to use that thing versus how often I'm going to use this thing? It makes much more sense for me to have that space because I'm going to be there X amount of hours per week or whatever. I mean, that also is, there's all
Yeah.
kinds of
So
ways to
when
think
you
about
can feel secure in your position because you've really thought it through. So
it.
that's what's give you leverage. And I really just remind my clients, you want to find what that sweet spot is, because
Mhm.
you do want to go into a negotiation confident and willing to walk away. That's what makes it a real negotiation. You definitely want, and when I say walk away, I don't mean from the relationship. I
Yeah,
just
I'm
mean
sorry.
from
I'm out of here. I didn't get that. Yeah,
decision on the space, right? It's
yeah,
a
yeah.
decision on the space or a decision on the job. Because
Yeah.
even if you say no to the job, and I've had clients who will say no to something and they still keep that networking connection. You never
Mhm.
know when you're going to
Yeah,
work
it's
with
true.
these people again. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it's a
Okay.
no to just that particular thing. And then the final thing, we talked about it. It's the simulation. It's
Mm,
run a dress rehearsal. There is a reason why Broadway shows don't open without that dress rehearsal,
that's
because
right.
things happen. Props fall down,
Mm,
or exits and enters don't work out according to, what we rehearsed, right? So we
yeah.
really want to feel it. We want to feel that pushback. I can't, that same person who I told you got the executive director job at the salary that an
Mm,
existing executive director should get, when we did the dress rehearsal, remember, she's a professional fundraiser. And she even said that to me. She said, Caroline, I got this. This is my job. It's okay. I negotiate for a living. And I said, well, but you don't negotiate for yourself. So why not just for me,
mm,
just so I can hear? Maybe there's some adjustments we can make last minute. And she
mm.
said, okay, sure. And so I said, I will be the board member that she was going to have a conversation with, and you be yourself, and let's just practice this. And so this was before, video calls were really, we were on the phone, but I was recording it because I wanted her to hear it. And so I said, okay, so I'd say, so Jenna, why, what are you thinking about in terms of salary for this position? Because they're going to ask her for the number. And we had worked it out, 300,000, 300,000. That's not a hard number to say. And so she said, okay, well, and she started stuttering and
Oh,
stammering all over the
oh
place.
no.
3 or 4 go rounds later, I had to play her and she played the board member just to get it out in the open. And the thing is, of course, you could be a professional negotiator, or you can think that you're a good negotiator, but when you're doing it for yourself, for something that you really care about,
Yeah.
there's anxiety there, there's stress there, because you're not just asking for more money. It's also, you're putting yourself out on the line. It's like asking for a date, asking someone to marry you, right? There's a lot at stake. It's not just the
Especially if it's
answer.
a new salary range, right? Because it's something that you might not quite be confident enough with yet, accepting for yourself. So, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so an exercise that I give to students when I'm doing a workshop is the demand statement, just walking around the room and saying the number that you have in your head.
Mm.
Sometimes just saying that number, and people don't even realize it's hard for them to say. Now, she's raised millions of dollars. And so it wasn't the amount of money, but it was the amount of money attached to herself,
Yeah.
attached to a role that she really wanted.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot there. It's not just one sentence.
Right. So going to the simulation that I talked about before with my boss at the time, I went in with a number in my head, knowing that, all right, the market is this, I'm at this. I would be happy with a 50% pay increase. So I went in asking for more because, again, I simulated it with another business owner who was an expert negotiator who really taught me some great skills, and I absorbed like a sponge. And I trusted the process. I really did. I said, okay, I'm just going to do this. What do I have to lose? I'm not making enough now. And if I lose this job because of over negotiating, oh, well, I've now got the experience that I wanted. So, that point of being willing to walk away in a situation like that, I was willing. And I think that so I'm sorry, I went to a whole nother area here, but I wanted to jump off there because I think that's really important to kind of focus on, is that you've got to be willing to walk away. I talk about this all the time, and I've seen this time and time again with people having remarkable shifts in their career where there was that one pivotal moment, especially when you are young and you're just getting started in management, or you haven't even made it to management yet. You've got to be willing to walk away, because those years are pivotal. They're critical to be able to start getting into that management role or senior level role as soon as you can. Because like you said, it just builds on itself, right? Salary increases build on itself, management, it builds on itself. So you need to get that started as soon as you can. I was willing to walk away, and I want to make sure that I say that, because that gave me so much leverage when I went in to ask for this massive salary increase. Now, I also knew that I was willing to negotiate. I knew he wanted to negotiate. And that's another point you made, which is knowing the person that you're going in to negotiate with. What do they want? He's an expert negotiator. He was from Israel, and I'm Jewish, so I feel like I could say that. We love negotiating, and it was just something he saw as an art, as something to be cherished, that he could do that really well. So I didn't want to take that away from him. I knew that about him, so I left room to negotiate. I went in super high, knowing that he'd be like, oh, wait a second, that's a little too much. We're going to have to bring that down. And we met in the middle. I ended up walking away with exactly what I wanted, which was a 50% salary increase, which is massive, massive.
Yeah.
And that absolutely changed my entire career. I was probably 26, 27 at the time. You better bet you, once you negotiate that and you're in that situation for a little while, you're never going to go back down again. You're only going to go back up. So that was critical to my career trajectory. So
Yeah. And companies respect good negotiators. I'm sure your boss,
absolutely,
being a good negotiator, could see in you and say, wow, I'm glad that she's on our side of the desk. So they're going
he
to
was
love that you're
beaming.
working there.
Yeah, he was beaming. I think he loved that negotiation. I think he really prided himself on it, because it was a win-win. He felt more like I was a more valuable employee at that point. And I think you're absolutely right. He saw that I had it in me. And so as a result, I got more responsibilities. I got to negotiate on behalf of the company more and more, and just increased my value there as an employee. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, you evidence a lot of things when you negotiate. I mean, it's certainly confidence, of course,
Yeah.
communication skills, the
Yep.
fact that you understand your value, you understand your role, you understand the business. And so there's so much there that an employer, your company is really going to admire, because they're going to say, wow, I'm glad that this person is working for us and not for the competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you brought 7 steps to the table today, Carolyn. I had no idea you were going to do that, but man, you have really given us a lot to digest and a lot to go on, like a real plan of action. So, going forward, somebody who's never really thought about the art of negotiation, what would you recommend for someone to sharpen their skills? Like, what kind of opportunities? How could someone take this going forward today?
Yeah, so you can see, based on the fact that there are 7 steps, there's no shortage of things to work on. I would just encourage people to ask for more things, right? And that's something that you can
Mm,
practice every day. You can ask for help. You can ask for a deadline extension if it's not going to get you into any trouble. You can ask for feedback. You can go to a flea market and ask for a better price, right? You can
mm,
find ways of asking for things, because negotiation is all about making a request. And if you don't ask, the answer will always be no. Right. And so you have to get comfortable asking. So that's something that you can practice in the day to day. The other thing is, we talked about how negotiation is really about, understanding the market and understanding what the company needs. And that's also something that you can practice, just being comfortable framing things in terms of the business, right? Just really
mm.
understanding what your contribution is, what the business needs, what the business values. And so if you're unclear about that, right? If you're not sure what your value is, just you can work on that on your own time before the next negotiation, just being more comfortable discussing and understanding business issues. And then I would say the third thing, we talked about the dress rehearsal, right? You talked
Yeah.
about seeing the CEO and getting nervous. Negotiation is nerve wracking. And so knowing that, really think about, when I'm nervous, how do I calm myself down? How do
Mm.
I bounce back when I make a mistake? Like, what are some ways that I can take care of myself and really increase my capacity for resilience? So just understanding what your pressure points are, what stresses you out, and how you can relax yourself. That's also going to help you in a
Oh,
negotiation.
that is such a good point. Okay, so I'm so glad you brought that up because in that situation with that CEO, where I was really, his presence was so intense, and I almost felt like this panicky kind of energy, nervous energy coming up. That's the scariest possible thing. I was like, what am I going to do? Freeze? I mean, it was really, really scary. But I had learned a technique through a book called The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, and he talked about, just being really present. And so I had just read that book maybe a couple of times at that point. I was really into it. And so right away, my mind went to, what can I do to deal with this in the moment while he's talking? Because I need to bring myself to a more calm state. And so I just focused on being super present and putting my awareness on this nervous energy without like thinking about it or judging it or getting in my head. So I just wasn't thinking, focused on the energy and just put the light of my attention on it, knowing that I can overcome this with love and presence. And so that's what I did. And it really, really helped. So I'm so thankful that I had that tool in my toolbox because it helped me overcome that. So thank you for bringing that up. That is a really good point. If you are somebody who gets nervous or feels insecure, knowing that about yourself and stimulating situations where you can calm yourself or regulate your nervous system in cases like that and practicing that and having that in your toolkit, I think it's really important. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's good that you had that book and you had that reference. And so you can call on that. For people who don't think about it till they get into that situation, they're going to find that they're going to be sweating, they're going to be shaking, they're going to be stumbling on the words. And if they hadn't read that book or don't have that technique, I tell my clients to feel their feet, on the floor, like really dig
Hmm.
into the floor. If they can get into their body, your body is very in the now. You're not
Yeah.
thinking about the future or the past because you're just focused on all five toes on the floor, your ankle, like really your heel really pressing in. And so I've had clients who are very, very nervous and that technique has really worked for them. So it's very similar, just being
Mm.
in your body.
Yeah, I think there must be quite a few, maybe the breath, maybe yogic breathing. Again, bringing yourself into your body, just being really present and getting out of your head is the key. So if you practice yoga, knowing to just focus on the breathing in and out. Now, obviously, you don't want to do it noticeably in in the meeting. That would be a little weird, but but in your mind, just focusing on the breath in and out would also bring you into the present moment and ground you. So I think there's a few techniques there for people to think about, like what might work for you. Is it the breathing? Is, just focusing on the breath? Is it, like Caroline said, focusing on the feet, on the ground, grounding yourself? Or like Eckhart Tolle talks about, bringing your focus and your attention just on that nervousness, right? Instead of thinking about it and letting it go to your head and then letting that further dysregulate you, just put your presence in that feeling and know that that presence alone can, what he calls, transmute it, bring light. You're bringing light to it. And therefore, you're not letting it kind of come up with all kinds of strange scenarios in your head and then further panicking you. And so those are just a few there, but I'm sure there's many more. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So
Sure.
Caroline, is there any, I think we just covered basically everything that I wanted us to cover today regarding negotiation and how we could apply the art of negotiation, the skills of negotiation in our everyday life, from relationships and moving to negotiating for your career, getting a new job, a salary raise, all that good stuff. Are there any last words of wisdom that you would like to leave us with before we end?
Well, I just hope that it encourages more people to negotiate. I think there's this myth that you're either born good at it or you're not,
Yeah.
and some people might feel like, oh, I'm not an expert communicator. I'm not a great improviser or a spontaneous speaker. So I'm not going to be any good at this. And that's just not true. Everything we talked about are things that people can work on and get better at. And so I would just encourage people to negotiate more than they think that they should, negotiate for more than they think they should. Just push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone and you'll probably find a much happier result than if you didn't do it at all.
Thank you for that. I absolutely agree with that. And I will also add on to that it's important to negotiate for yourself. This doesn't make you a bitch, doesn't make you a mean person, doesn't make you selfish. It makes you someone who has respect and value for themselves. And in turn, others will respect and value you too. So it's important that we learn how to negotiate for ourselves. Caroline, thank you so much for having this wonderful conversation. Now, would you be able to share with us how anyone could get in touch with you? Is there a website? And how do you help others? Is there coaching that you do, or how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I coach people one-to-one. I also work with organizations. So I often will do a negotiation workshop, for either the affinity groups within an organization or for a specific team, the sales team or the marketing team or something like that. But my website is dreamcareerclub.com. So that is the best way to just learn more about me. And I've got a lot of free resources on there, hundreds of blogs and sample lessons for different areas of professional development, including negotiation.
Oh my gosh, she's an excellent writer, by the way. Definitely check out her website. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you having this conversation with me.
Well, it's an important conversation, so thanks for having me.
Hey, if we haven't connected on social media yet, I would love to connect with you there. You will find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all at my handle at Jenna Banks.0. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Jenna Banks. If you would like to learn more about my book or my free email series called Love Notes to Myself, or sign up for my newsletter or read my blog or any of that stuff, just check out my website, which is jenna-banks.com. Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the show today. I really appreciate having you here. And I hope to see you again next time. And remember, your love is your power. Until next time.